So the next panel, it's going to be more like a debate, I think. It's going to be about the relationship between technology and aid. Is it love and aid? Technology and trust, sorry, and is it love or aid, or combination of both? And for that, I'm going to have the Ambassador Christian Dussey, Director of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, come and join me, as he's going to be moderating this panel. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Florence. Good morning, everyone. Good evening if you are following us from Asia. So hello, everyone who are also following us online. I will follow the advice of Professor Vetterli this morning, who said that we should switch to English to have a larger audience, really understanding the spectacular reach and power of the ecosystem of the region between Vaud and the canton of Geneva. This morning we look through the different panels at the definition of trust, its meaning for us, depending where we are, what is our position, and what are the current understanding of the challenges we face. We've also learned that it is critical to create trust. Trust will be the foundation of all human and business interaction. And so now we go a step further and we look at the delicate relationship between technology and trust, this love and hate relationship. And we are here today with a lot of the main thought leaders and thinkers from academia, from science, from industry, from governance, from ethics. And please join me in welcoming our panelists this morning here. And I will first invite the Rector of the University of Lausanne, Professor Hernandez. Then Mr. Philippe Amon, the CEO of SICPA from the industry. Mr. Philippe Duguin, the CEO of Cyber Peace Institute, representing the civil society. Mr. Patrice Perche, Senior Executive Vice President of Fortinet. Thank you for joining us. And Professor Martin Vetterli, the President of the EPFL. But before we start this panel, I will invite you to look at the message that is sent to us from the President of Microsoft, Mr. Brad Smith.
I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate by video in this important conference. As I had a chance to read a little bit about what you all are discussing, I was struck by how apt I think it is to have the conversation that you're having about the so-called love-hate relationship with technology. You might find it surprising to hear somebody from the tech sector say this, but I absolutely believe it. It's good to have a love-hate relationship with technology. About a year ago, I co-authored a book with another Microsoft employee, Carol Ann Brown. We entitled the book Tools and Weapons, the Promise and the Peril of the Digital Age. To us, that captures this love-hate relationship. Technology is one of the most powerful tools of our time. It can help us solve almost any problem we need to address. But it has also become a formidable weapon. And the only way to think clearly and address these issues the way they deserve is to really recognize both sides of this coin. I think it's so good for people in Vaud and Geneva to come together and really think together about the role that you can play. I fundamentally believe it is possible to improve digital trust, to meet business needs. For example, not just in this pandemic, but if we find ourselves facing another one, or in almost any other environment that raises new challenges for us all. One of the things I found is that so often trust starts with transparency. It starts by looking a problem squarely in the eye, acknowledging that it exists. It then really requires that we analyze and come to a common point of view about the kind of problem we need to address and the kinds of steps that will most make a difference. I found that in the world today, people really do value privacy, the security of their information, digital safety, especially the protection of their children. And we all live in a world with ubiquitous social media that can be disrupted, whether it's by a foreign government or a domestic group that's really intent on spreading misinformation instead of accurate knowledge about the facts of the day. And we need to work together, whether it is to address COVID-19 or anything else that may come. And I believe that fundamentally a regional group, like the one that you all are part of, has a vital role to play. And I think that's especially important in the case of your two cantons. First of all, I think it's always important to find the best local solutions to local problems. We live in a world where digital technology may be global, but culture, values also have important local nuances. And so often the best solutions need to be true to that local culture. But I think there's a second reason that this is especially important for all of you. Many of you come from institutions that are not important only in the canton of Geneva or the canton of Vaud, but literally to Switzerland as a nation and to the world as a whole. When I think of the leadership role of EPFL or the Graduate Institute or all of the international organizations and NGOs that are based near where you live and work, I constantly appreciate that what you are doing is of fundamental importance to the world. I think that there are few nations in the world that stand for the proposition of trust more than Switzerland. There are few parts of Switzerland that are more important to this than this part of Lac Léman. So thank you for what you're doing. I hope that we at Microsoft can continue to be a part of it, can continue to support you, and from my perspective, continue to learn from everything you're doing. Have a good conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brad Smith, for your words, and a round of applause. Thank you for highlighting several of key issues that we have been talking this morning, or we're going to talk now, and also for your trust in the Trust Valley. Something in his speech struck me, coming from a more security policy perspective, is said that technology can be a powerful tool, but also a conduit for formidable weapons. And this is also part of this hate-love relationship that we have between trust and technology. And I would start the discussion with you, Professor Hernandez. How would you describe the relationship between trust on one side and technology? And going further, what you said on the first panel this morning.
So I think your title summarizes it beautifully, love and hate. But I think another word we can add to this is dependency. Because one of the reasons why we love or hate, depending, sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's different people, the technology that the cyber world offers us is that we are completely dependent on it. I mean, anybody who doesn't now buy his train ticket on the phone, I think realizes how inconvenient it is to go buy it in the train station. Anybody who remembers, many of the people don't probably, how inconvenient it was to put a map on your steering wheel and to try to determine at the same time, the panels on the road and where you should turn looking at a map. Now you don't have to do this with a GPS, but the fact is, many people don't know how to read a map anymore and become completely dependent on a GPS. So basically, every time you agree to use one of these wonderful new technologies, you at the same time give up some of your independence. And I think this is what, in part, what creates this love-hate relationship. And I don't know how much time I have, but I think another thing I want to say is that the word trust often goes together with win. You win somebody's trust. And I think this is a message to companies who develop these wonderful technologies. You cannot expect trust from the public if you don't deserve it and if you don't win it. And we have many examples of companies who have abused the public's trust. And I think this is also at the basis of the problem we have now.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the concept of win. Professor Vetterli, has the concept of win in this relationship changed over the past 6 months since we started with the COVID crisis?
The concept of, sorry?
The win, the fact that we have to win the trust.
Winning the trust, winning
yes.
the trust. Well, I think there is everything to win back, right? I mean, it's just amazing how much trust has been wasted by these companies. And that's not since COVID, right? I mean, it's the data leaks, essentially at all big tech companies, the Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2016 and so on. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. What I'm very surprised is that society, civil society, has not reacted. Civil society should regulate such stuff, right? I mean, if this is what dominates the world, and that you have monopolies, and these monopolies do not deserve the trust of civil society, my God, civil society should wake up. My God, politicians should stand up and raise to the challenge. I'm very surprised that we are taken for a ride, but I think it is what Nouria says. We operate in a very interesting psychological spot, right? Which is, as you know, humans, when they are in a negotiation to buy something or whatever, as long as there is a real price to pay, we actually try to think rationally. Is it worth it, right? But there is a singularity, which is when something is free, we actually don't think anymore. I mean, social psychologists have done experiments like this. And this is exactly the trick, right? All that stuff that we get for this love and this hate is actually free. Therefore, we, quote unquote, buy into it without thinking about it, and then we are dependent on it, and then it's very hard to get out of it. Now, what I'm also very surprised, but I'm not an economist, you know, Standard Oil was broken up in the 20s, right? So monopolies should be broken up because they are anti-competitive. Yet, except Europe, which actually is a good example with Vestager, tries to do something. The rest of the world finds this is very convenient not to do anything about it. And I don't understand all these free market economists that are running around, you know, on this particular issue, they don't say anything, okay? Maybe, again, they are in a dependency with respect to these technologies.
Thank you. So we go immediately to the industry side. Mr. Perche, how do you appreciate or assess this change in the risk also perception of civil society or governments toward your industry? You represent a company based in the US.
Yeah, so I would say this digital transformation journey that both government, but every company, even user, are in fact has to go through, generate a lot of new challenge, especially I will say a massive increase of potential threats, and why we see a global competition from an economic perspective, because we see governments starting to protect themselves and even invest on their local technology. There is a need for having collaboration worldwide. So, and I think this trust in terms of be able to combine collaboration between private and public, and even competitor, I think it's essential for the future, because none of the local government or private company can deal alone and provide, in fact, the necessary infrastructure and technology to deal with the massive amount of threats we are facing. To illustrate a bit what we've seen, at least from a technology provider also providing threat intelligence, we are per days dealing with about 100 billion of threats. We are providing 1 billion signature per day, and it was like in 2 years, 10 times more than what we've seen 2 years ago. So it's really increasing. And we see that the challenge is also not just like a small, I would say, organization. It's well-financed organization that make a lot of money, sometimes also behind government, because it's also an economic competition. So you can't just rely on one country and technology. So you have to build this collaboration. So we try as one of the leaders in this space to build this collaboration. So we had an initiative around our technology to onboard, in fact, other technology that is needed because you can't cover all aspects. And as well, we also try to leverage the other element, which is about trust, is about knowledge and understanding. And if you ask most of the board member, which manage the largest company in the world, and you ask about cybersecurity and about the risk, because they are quite old compared to the young generation coming, which born with this technology, they don't know how to deal with. So there's also an education issue that has to be done at the board level, but down to the young generation people, that will help, of course, increase the trust, because when you don't understand, there is a fear, and that's creating, in fact, this love and trust situation. I will say that the need we see in our industry, which also should generate a lot of opportunities, especially in Switzerland, but there is a massive lack of a skill shortage. So it's about 1 million in 2022, just about our industry. But when we ask our partner here in Switzerland, but you ask even the user, they all have the same request. Do you have people they can operate security? Do you have people they can help us on implementing? Do you have and us ourselves, we're also looking for also top-notch talent, engineering people coming from a great university like EPFL for engineering and R&D, but we need also people operating. And I think the overall need in terms of education, it's quite essential. So if we're able to raise, and we have to start from the young people at school to educate them about cybersecurity and the threats, I think we'll have a better understanding and will also increase the overall trust against the technology and innovation.
Thank you. I think we all agree that the crisis we're in now with COVID has highlighted the importance of trust in technology. And so I would like to ask you starting with you, Mr. Amon, from the industry perspective, how can you give us a concrete example on how this situation has impacted your company working mainly on trust product?
It works?
Yes.
Hello. Thank you very much. I think that we live in a world where trust becomes essential, in a world that has been globalized extensively during the last 30 years, although we're seeing now some sort of deglobalization movement. And to refer to what Mr. Brad said before, the cultural element, the geopolitical element plays a role. I think we have spoken this morning a lot about cyber, about data that has become a very central element in the world, a very valuable asset, and one that is the carrier, or should be the carrier of trust. But Professor Vetterli said we have to regain control. Professor Hernandez said trust, we have to convince people. We never have to forget that the data in question are all generated in the material world. People, product are the generated of data. And if those data are not authenticated, if we talk about people, we refer to identity at large, and product to the nature of product, then the whole system will be flawed. So I think that solution to gain or regain trust will come from technologies. These technologies will have to incorporate at least 3 dimensions: people, product, data, and in a certain way, the human being comes back as a central point in the picture, which is probably a very good news. I think the region, Switzerland at large, and more specifically the Léman region, has all the resources, the competencies, the attribute, the environment to be a central point in the world to generate the appropriate technologies. I think Switzerland has a unique position at this stage in the global world, in the geopolitical context, to play a major role. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Hernandez, in education, we talked before about how the leadership is different. You lead a higher education institution, but it goes from the leadership to the students, having to now not be in big auditorium, but having all the course virtual. How was the transformation possible within institutions like yours?
So this brings an interesting point. So as was mentioned before by Professor Pasini for the HEIGVD, we also, like all universities in Switzerland, had to put all our classes online from one day to the other. That meant using technology which is out there, Zoom or similar things, similar programs. And what kind of problems did we immediately get? We immediately got law problems. We got students who said, you don't have the right to tape whatever we say, during these sessions. We had professors who told us, I don't want to be taped. I mean, if I say something wrong, if I make a mistake in my speech, then it's, there for all students to see, and then students will give wrong answers at the exams, and I will have problems with the validity of my exams. And so I think this puts, again, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but again, this shows how this problem is completely interdisciplinary. And this shows how, in that particular field of digital trust, we need also the law aspect for us to function. For us, for us it was vital. Either we have classes online or we don't have classes. And so you would expect people to say, well, great, you have classes online, we're not going to ask questions. Not at all. You have classes online. Well, that's a problem because A, B, C, D. So I think this is a very concrete example of how trust in this case was lacking and how it nearly prevented us from basically continuing our main mission, which is teaching students.
Thank you. So lots of new problem sets that were not there before, and it makes a link to what Professor Vetterli said before. What is the reaction of civil society? And I give the floor to Mr. Duguin. You present the civil society as the CEO of the Cyber Peace Institute. What is your take on this?
Thank you. When you were mentioning COVID-19, if you just focus on what is happening on the healthcare as a vertical, and how we can see what is happening for the past months could have a very deep impact on trust, and beyond trust, impact on human safety. Cyber attack on the healthcare is not new. So sadly enough, it's not new. It's not like we woke up in COVID-19 and you say, we need to protect hospitals because they're under attack. At the peak of COVID-19 in February, March, there was one attack documented every day. So you imagine that by attack, I mean groups still to be seen if it's criminals or if it's state actors, but groups that are attacking hospitals and basically making sure that the computer cannot work anymore and then hospital has to pay in order to get back on system. When you're in the midst of COVID-19, you can't wait because any hour of disruption is problematic for the whole community that depends on you. So this is not new. This is a very old phenomenon. This is not sophisticated, sadly enough. In order to do such an attack, you do not need to have crazy sophistication and investment, to be fair. But what is very strange is that this is still happening, and the responsibilities that would create trust are not or well-defined or enforced, because who is responsible? So you have, at state level, there's a clear responsibility when it comes to protecting the healthcare and not attacking the healthcare. You have at industry level, making sure that this very complex infrastructure that is the one that healthcare professional needs to use today because they are dependent on it in order to provide the service is secured, and they have the capacity to secure it. And there's accountability when it comes to giving capacity to the healthcare, to when you have one budget in order to manage health and cybersecurity in your hospital, then in COVID-19 you imagine where the budget is going. That's quite simple. Something else that doesn't help with trust is that if you look into studies that goes into attack on hospitals, you will always see you would always see like feedback when it comes to the cost. For example, on industry, it costs so much money to pay a ransom, like $60,000 in average, or it costs more than $6 million to put back your hospital back into service. But what is the cost to human? What is the cost to communities? Because that cost is the one that is going to erode trust. There's a study of last year, and I welcome everyone to look into it, that says that an hospital that is under ransomware, post-ransomware, for the months afterwards, it takes 2.7 minutes extra to healthcare professional provide urgent care for someone in need in the context of the heart attack. These 2.7 minutes have an impact at scale on human life. And that's something that is underseen totally, because we are focusing on other parts of the problematic, and that's not going to help trust. And just something also about trust in technology, love and hate. The problematic also is that it's not like everyone distrusts technology. On the contrary, misinformation, for example, and misinformation around the capacity of hospital to cure COVID or the vaccine are interesting or not, or we need to question everything about science. In fact, there's a huge trust of technology for those that are distrusting science, public speech, normal reasoning. So this distrust into what was the foundation of society are now accelerated by the overarching trust into a technology that gives you something very easy to digest and take as if, the earth is flat and it's very easy to see the world afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would like to come back to this notion of trust. And how would you describe or look for the key ingredients that will be essential to create this trust technology relationship? The key ingredients. I start with you, Mr. Amon, from the industry side.
I think it's basically security in terms of technology, in terms of technology bricks. Sometimes solutions are very complex, but they also have to be user-friendly. They have to be accessible at large. They have to be tailor-made for the different needs, whether it's government or private sector or individual. They have to be also extensible, but they also have to be able to be globalized, taking into account the particularity of government, of region, of different group of people.
Thank you, Professor Vetterli. On the same questions, what is the key ingredient that you can see on your day-to-day work with researcher or with the industry or with your students?
I think the first ingredient is transparency. I think, I've come to the field of computer science. Everybody knows that the safest software is open source software. Sorry for the rest of the industry, right? Because that's the one that is scrutinized by most people, because it's open. People can look at it. Millions of people can, make comments if they want. So transparency is number one. The second one is democratic governance. I like Brad, but he talks about trust. He says digital trust to meet business needs. Society needs trust. It so happens that businesses can live off this demand from society to have trust, but it's not the other way around, right? It's not that businesses need trust, because then it may help society. It's sort of the cart before the, it's the thing is upside down, I'm sorry. And so democratic governance is the second element. The third one is, was alluded to by several of you, is I call this digital maturity, so that the population actually understand what is going on. Okay, it's very sort of funny in some sense that the conspiracy theorists who are totally non-scientific use actually, the highest level of technology to, disrupt society. So I think that's an education of a general education of the population of what it means to move from a physical society into one that is in large part virtualized.
Okay, thank you. Professor Hernandez, would you add something from the UNIL perspective?
Well, I think really Martin said it all, but I can just insist on the last part, which is education of the population and of our students. And I think this education doesn't necessarily have to be technology or math or whatever, informatics oriented. It can also be an explanation in simple words of what an informatic program can do, what companies who collect data can do with this data and cannot do. And this, I think, explained in simple terms, anybody can understand, anybody. But as we saw before in these questions asked, many people don't know much about it. And I think it's the job of our schools in general to give this education to our students.
Thank you, Mr. Duguin. Awareness raising, this is something that more in your field.
No, I will build on what was said before. The education is central. You could even frame this into like cognitive self-defense, almost, in terms of being capacity to understand the world around you and just understanding the fact that there's a lot of entities around you that just try to get your attention span and to make a product out of it and to understand the mechanics that are there. Because it's amazing, and Professor Vetterli was mentioning it before, that at the same time when, for example, Cambridge Analytica scandal was out there, still at the same time, Facebook was on the rise when it comes to number of users, into shareholder confidence into the product, etc. So there's something there that we need that needs to be addressed, because both are not going together. And we saw also in the survey before, this, I think, misplaced trust by younger generation in the fact that because they are good user of a technology, there's the feeling that they understand the technology and they master it. It's very different to be a nice user, because the technology makes you a nice user. It takes all friction out, and you can slide super fast, click super fast. Doesn't make you an expert understanding what someone is trying to get out of you when you do this.
Thank you, Mr. Perche, from the industry perspective.
Yeah, I think on maybe also going back a bit on this trust is we have to separate the two elements of the trust, more the human trust, which I think we talk a lot about how humans behave against this technology and the change and the fear, and what we call more the digital trust, which refer more to the technology and what can be built and maybe provided from a product and I will say all services around. And here, interesting to share is that we clearly see a big trend due to the complexity of the not only the attack surface but also complexity about the different area where we have to cover whatever is cloud, work from home, on-prem, and corporate and government. This has generated, of course, a serious problem, and we're starting to look about how a platform or technology can provide what we call zero trust network access, which is a bit kind of the opposite of what we're talking about trust. But and a zero trust network access doesn't mean that we don't want to grant or block access for the user, but it's to look about how we will make sure that the user, while he may have the necessary access by authentication, depending on his behavior, we can potentially block or adapt on his behavior and the access of the resource. So this clearly, of course, the complexity that I can see from the technology side and how fast it's evolving as we have OT conversion with IT. We're talking this morning about critical infrastructure that's now fully integrated. So, and we see that those hackers are also starting to look about those machines. And with the future of the 5G, with an explosion of the new product that will be connected and the mesh computing, will be another vector of threat. So this creates, in fact, a challenge in terms of the trust, because the technology is moving so fast and the digital transformation is moving so fast that we need to make sure that by the education, I think that's the most important aspect, and collaboration between public and private and even computer, at least there is a chance we can at least come with a reasonable answer. I don't think we can potentially catch all the future threat, but that will increase the level of trust that people needed.
Thank you. And now for the last question, if we would project ourselves a bit ahead, 1, 2, 3 decades, let's say 2050, how would you describe at that time? It's a bit difficult, but what would we would like to see in this relationship between technology and trust? And I start by the industry first, Mr. Perche, and then Mr. Amon.
I think we will continue to see this kind of situation where there is a hate and love, which I think is a virtual process, because then that means we can raise and again try to improve, in fact, all the technology to make sure that people understand it and it can catch up, in fact, in the future. So I think that will continue. I don't see that's a normal process. I hope that the technology, like we see emerging, all this intelligence, artificial, machine learning technology that we are starting to use to the volumes will help a lot and will also drive, in fact, the people to have a better, I will say, overall confidence on the technology they will use and the communication that will be there at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Amon.
It's very difficult to predict, of course, but I think that in an ideal world, technology should be at the service of people in a trustable way, in a transparent way, in a democratic governance way. We should aim for that.
Thank you. In the education side, Professor Hernandez, then Professor Vetterli.
My reaction is the same. It's very difficult. I think technology will develop at an always faster pace. So in 10 years, I think we can't even imagine now what we will have then. And so my hope is that people will be prepared in that their knowledge about these technologies will be much higher on average than it is now about the present technologies. Again, I think that's the job of the schools. And I think also, as you just said, that people will dominate technology and not the reverse.
Thank you. Professor Vetterli?
So, I think in 2050, that's in 30 years' time, it was said, so it's hard to predict, but I think we underestimate two elements here, which are just as important as technology or cybersecurity and so on. One is yesterday, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was given for CRISPR-Cas9 to two ladies, two very famous ladies. I was very pleased to see this, right? Finally, some gender balance in Stockholm, and absolutely well-deserved. So gene editing, might have on a 30-year horizon a much bigger impact than we see now today. Okay, I mean, to play with an app, to be on Facebook, fine, right? But assume, some country has some new breed of humans. Okay,
this is it.
That's quite a change. That's quite disruptive. Okay?
Quite scaring too.
And that's totally in the cards, right? Again, it comes to governance and to question of, do democratic society have the maturity to deal with such questions? Because otherwise, some other societies will deal with these questions in ways we may not necessarily find very palatable. That's one. Another one that is extremely predictable is climate change. Okay, it has been going on for the last 150 years. The curve, I mean, we are here, we say, 30 years, very hard to predict. That curve is very, very predictable, okay, especially if we don't do anything about it. And the only thing we do about it on the technology side is that we do Bitcoin mining, okay, and the last I saw is that, the mining of Bitcoins consumes the energy equivalent to, some medium-sized country, okay? And so not only does technology not solve that problem, it actually makes the problem worse. So I would bet for these two as being the major problems, okay? And the ones we discussed here are super important, but if the other ones are not considered, it's sort of noise.
Thank you. Mr. Duguin, also?
Yeah, to continue with this concept, that we find a way, I mean, the only way for the possibility to have a 2050 would be that we inverse the equation that today the innovation technology goes to the speed of light, but governance, democratic governance, regulation goes to the speed of law. And that's two different speeds. And if we don't revert this equation, we are going to have a big issue when it comes to, when I join what Martin was saying now, convergence of disruptive challenges or technologies, and our brain is not wired to predict this convergence. When artificial intelligence is exponential, when augmented reality is exponential, when gene sequencing is exponential, with climate change on this, what is going to happen? No one knows. What we know is that if we continue with this innovation drives all and ill-intentioned use of technology drives all, as we could see end of 2017, a bunch of people thinking that it's super funny to put the faces of actresses on porn star And that experiment, 3 weeks of experiments, now is shaking the foundation of the reality of evidence in the whole world. As long as we don't have this kind of governance model around this, 2050 is going to be an interesting year.
Thank you, these words. Now we're going to the to closing this panel, and we've seen that all through the morning that the definition of trust depend on where we come from. So the different cultures we have, the different angles we look at, the different tools and skill set we have in order just to tackle the challenge we have. And for me, the two key ingredients in this, and this is probably for all of us wherever we are, is first that we should not fight the problems at hand, but we should shape the solution. And this is especially on what we insist at GCSP, we don't fight problems, but we shape solutions. And the second point that brings all what we see in international security is that we have constantly to maintain and to build the trust, to avoid the trap of miscalculation, misinterpretation, misinformation, misjudgment. And this is so dangerous in the world in which we live now. This is the trust, but after all, the trust starts with us. It's about listening, it's about sharing, it's about looking at other perspectives, understanding the other perspectives, and I'm delighted that we are all here eager to work together to enable this innovation, to create this basis of trust through the new Trust Valley. Thank you so much for participating to the panelists and for you for attending, whether you are here in Lausanne or you are online worldwide. Thank you so much. Thank you, and a round of applause for the panelists. Okay. Je vous ai rattrapé une minute.
The next question resonates with what you just discussed about trust, about finding a solution, about fighting a problem that we all have today. So if we can have the next question, please. If a vaccine for COVID-19 were available, will you get it? I think it's a very important question for all of us. So will you strongly agree, somewhat disagree, strongly disagree? So while you vote, we will hear from another key thought leaders, André Kudelski. We have a video from him. Thank you.
Welcome to this conference about trust. Trust is something really important, not only today. 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, it was absolutely key in human interaction. Now, let's talk a little bit about the COVID-19. It has changed many things. The first element is that you cannot anymore consider that the future is a linear interpolation of the past. You have a lot of disruption, things that are non-linear. And through this non-linearity, number of people are seeing the risk because the disruption is creating some discomfort and people see the risk rather than anything else. On the other side, you have few people that look in this discontinuity and see incredible opportunities. And that is what we should be trying to look after. Because if the negative elements are certain, the opportunity, if we take them, may also become something very positive. Now, Switzerland has some competitive advantage in all this trust adventure. First element is that Switzerland is, in a way, an academic superpower. Switzerland has also real great company, including startup, SMEs, and larger organizations that are very competitive in the market, but also are able to be a key international player. We have an element also extremely strong with the Geneva region through the United Nations and all the agencies that are related, the capability to influence some international standards, and that is something for trust that is also very important. And finally, we have the Swiss political system that is at the same time very stable and that is reliable. And here we can talk about a sort of trust bank. Now you will see just after a few examples of companies that are just navigating in these new opportunities. And I would say that with the Trust Valley, initiative, it's a right initiative in the perfect timing, but where we have to be careful is not to look at from a regional point of view, but really consider it's an initiative at the Swiss level, because we are stronger together, and that is the best way to be performing in a globalized world that is not always so easy to navigate in. So I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the presentation. Thank you for your attention.
So before we move to the next panel, let's wait. Oh, well, we have the results already. Okay, so to what extent do you agree or disagree if finding a vaccine COVID-19 were available, will you get it? Strongly agree, 34%. Let's see what Anna has to say.
Okay,
compared
hello
to the measured
again.
Population, 34% strongly agree.
Yeah, so this is a very long study that we did for the World Economic Forum around 1 month ago. At that time, 74% of these global, we can call it global results of 28 countries said, strongly agree, I will get it.
74?
74, yeah, 74. With a very big difference between the first country, which is China, and the last one, which is Russia. Okay? That's a big gap between the results here. But let me tell you something. We've seen that in the last 4 weeks, that 7.4 has going down like 25%. So each day goes by, the result gets closer and closer to your result. So it's a big deal. We are working a lot with the World Economic Forum and with the agencies around the lake, because all of these, the numbers that are behind me, it's about trust. Because we ask also the question why you wouldn't get a vaccine. And people are answering trust. So with that, I'm going to leave you. This is the last word I say today. So we are sitting in the country that is known because of trust. This is a big opportunity. I really wish you all a lot of luck and success in this project called Trust Valley. Count on Ipsos in order to give you the best information in order to get some oil into the machinery. Thank you very much.
Thank you.